Distinguished guests and speakers, good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Welcome to the G20 virtual side event G20 webinar series with the topic of Assuring Energy Access and Transitions in Archipelagic States. Today, 18th of May 2022, this event is hosted by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Republic of Indonesia, with the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. I'm Monica Conado, your host today, and I would like to greet all of you who are present virtually here. And I would like to mention Dr. Prahoro Nur Cahyo, the co-chair of the Energy Transition Working Group G20 Indonesia 2022, Mr. Honorable Jone Usamate, the Minister for Infrastructure, Meteorological Services, Lands and Mineral Resources of Fiji. I would like also to greet Mr. Rida Mulyana, the Director General of Electricity, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources of Indonesia. Mr. Nicola Bazzani, the Deputy Head of the Energy and Environment Office, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy. I would like also to mention and greet the Joint Secretary, Ministry of Power, Government of India, Mr. Vishal Kapoor. And then Mr. Hong Peng Liu, the Director, Energy Division, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. And last but not least, I would like to greet and mention Ms. Sandra Winarsa, the Program Development Manager, Green Energy of HIVAS. Distinguished speakers and participants, there are two sessions in this webinar, and in the first sessions, we will be listening to presentations and discussions about the best practices and lessons learned in archipelagic states and islands. And then the second sessions will be about the collaboration beyond the national energy sectors. Before proceeding to the sessions, let us all first listen to the opening remarks that will be delivered by Co-Chair Energy Transition Working Group of Indonesia, as well as the Head of the Human Resources Development Agency for Energy and Mineral Resources, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources of Indonesia. Please welcome Dr. Prahoro Nur Cahyo.
All distinguished speakers and participants, greeting to you all, good afternoon from Jakarta. I, Prahoro Nur Cahyo, co-chair of Energy Transitions Working Group, is pleased to welcome you all at the 6th webinar of ETWG webinar series. This webinar addresses highly interesting tagline, which is Assuring Energy Access and Transitions in Archipelagic States. Before I explain why energy access transitions really matters for no island left behind in the decade of actions, let me highlight the Indonesian's presidency's main profile of the Energy Transitions Forum. G20 Indonesia's presidency addresses the main theme of Recover Together, Recover Stronger. The presidency has set three pillars, namely global health architecture, digital economic transformations, and sustainable energy transitions. The pillar of sustainable energy transition is held under Energy Transitions Working Group, addressing three priorities on accessibility, technology, and financings. We have done the first meeting of ETWG around a month ago in Yogyakarta. In the first ETWG, G20 members and invitees unanimously endorsed the three priorities in energy transitions and the main agenda, aiming toward the key deliverables on the global deal to accelerate energy transitions in the ministerial meeting and leader summit in Bali. We call all these stages as the road to Bali. Realizing the road to Bali, between the meeting of ETWG, we will deepen issues on energy transitions through the series of virtual webinars. Today, the webinar number 6 on the urgencies of assuring sustainable energy access and transitions in archipelagic states will continue the journey of energy transitions discussions throughout the presidency's year. To the United Nations Economic and Social Commissions for Asia and the Pacific, I would like to convey our presidency's highest appreciation and gratitude for taking the strategic role as the co-organizers of today's webinar, marking the urgencies of universal energy access and sustainable energy transitions in the islands context to achieve Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goal SDGs. So why assuring energy access and transitions in archipelagic states is critical for leaving no islands behind. In G20 forums, energy access becomes a continuous agenda addressed in every presidency. However, this year is featured by the ambitious and critical global pledge addressed by the end of the last year in COP26 Glasgow. And G20 Forum has a responsibility and role to rewrite and strengthen the stories from ambitions into implementation. Indonesia as G20 member and ASEAN's member, as well as the world's largest archipelagic country, has a special interest to bring forward the issues of clean energy access and transitions in island context as a thematic discussion. Globally, in the midst of global pandemic COVID-19, the UN High-Level Political Forum 2020 has prioritized the opportunities for becoming greener and more resilient economies to achieve SDG 7 targets as prioritized in post-pandemic recovery. This special attention will also deliver to the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing countries related to SDG 7 achievement. Therefore, our presidency is collaborating with the UN ESCAPE will advance the issues during the year of presidency.
In fact, islands and archipelagos are at the forefront of facing adverse impact of climate change. They are not only encountering risks such as rising sea level, land subsidence, saltwater intrusion, and other ecological problems. Going further, the critical issues also come from the unaffordable cost for reliable energy sources and other sustainable energy-related problems in the remoteness and lack of connectivity.
As we know that energy now becomes a staple need to improve broader socio-economic and development aspects, we should drive more innovative policy, actions, and strategies to enhance resilience for communities in islands and archipelagos. Studies have shown that the dependence for diesel power generations in islands area is highly unaffordable for locals due to high cost expenditure in imported diesel fuels. Policy solutions such as innovative technologies from hybridizations with renewable energy and energy storage are essentials for problem solving. However, this requires enormous investment, wide social acceptance, and strong political will. It is no coincidence that G20 Bali Summits in mid-November this year will be followed by the Summit of Archipelagic and Island Countries, AIS Forum. This presidency year will become a powerful moment to address the importance of sustainable access and transitions in archipelagic states. We may not forget that among 15 countries which first ratified the Paris Agreement in 2016, 13 of them are island states because they are all at the forefront of climate efforts. In today's webinar, we will be having the experiences, insights, and perspectives from various stakeholders in championing sustainable energy access and transitions in islands and archipelagos around the world. Therefore, this webinar is made. These are also part of efforts from the international community towards access to electricity and clean cooking, which is currently lagging behind. Without further ado, to the UN ESCAPE, all speakers from multi-level entities, all G20 members and invitees, delegates, and all stakeholders, I wish you all to have a successful webinar.
Thank you, Mr. Prahoro Nur Cahyo, for the opening remarks and also who has already mentioned some of the backgrounds and the objectives of this event. Up next, we will be listening to the welcoming remarks that will be delivered by Mr. Nicola Bazzani, the Deputy Head of the Energy and Environment Office, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy, also the G20 Troika member. Mr. Nicola Bazzani, the floor is yours.
Mr. Co-Chair, dear colleagues, very good morning from a sunny day in Rome, Italy. First of all, as Troika member, I am very proud to deliver some introductory remarks. Italy strongly believes that multilateralism and the G20 is today the best answer to the problems we are all facing. We all live in one house, we like to say, and this house, unfortunately, is at risk for lack of energy access and climate change threats. Last year, during the Italian presidency of the G20, we committed to tackle this critical and urgent threat. We committed as well to step up universal access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all, as well as to eradicate energy poverty. We put a lot of efforts in reaffirming the commitment by developed countries to jointly mobilize $100 billion per year. We did succeed in obtaining new commitments, and we look forward to new commitments from others this year in order to achieve these important goals. Another important step that we took was the acknowledgement of the close link between climate change and the clean energy transition, recognizing that reducing emission intensity is an essential part of our mitigation efforts and a necessary step towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. At the same time, we must be aware that public resources alone cannot bear the full cost of the transition and of universal energy access. We have to mobilize the private sector because this is equally crucial. Public authorities, through targeted investments and enabling policies, can create the conditions to boost private investments and innovations. Therefore, we greatly appreciate that the Indonesian G20 presidency is continuing to address all these issues. Ensuring energy security and universal energy access in the island and archipelagic states while ensuring their transition to a clean energy system is a technical, financial and an economic challenge that all international collaboration and interaction between public and private sectors may be able to resolve. Italy itself is a peninsula with more than 800 islands. Therefore, we think that marine energy, offshore solutions and electrification, as well as the use of funds from our National Recovery and Resilience Plan, the interaction, as I said, between the private sector and public finance, the EU and other international resources, all of them are the main assets that we have to use to face a problem that affects us all in the first instance. Having said that, I will conclude my introductory remarks and I wish you all a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicola Bazzani. Greetings from Indonesia, sir. And moving on, from Italy, we will move to India. We will be listening to the remarks that will be delivered by Mr. Vishal Kapoor, the Joint Secretary, Distribution, Ministry of Power, Government of India, as well as the G20 Troika member. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Ministry of Power, Government of India, I would like to congratulate the Government of Indonesia for hosting this important side event on assuring energy access and transitions in archipelagic states. We in India firmly believe that cooperation amongst G20 countries to meet the ultimate goals and objectives of the Paris Agreement in a time-bound manner is of utmost importance for the entire planet. The world is making significant progress towards Sustainable Development Goal 7 to ensure access to affordable, reliable and modern energy for all. Despite the progress made, tracking SDG 7, the Energy Progress Report suggests globally that 759 million people continue to lack access to electricity, while 2.6 billion people were without access to clean cooking in 2019. Energy access therefore remains an urgent challenge for us to address as a global community. As the report notes, the pandemic situation further reversed several years of steady progress on enhancing energy access due to stalled installations owing to lockdowns and an increased strain on public finances on account of reduced economic activities in response to the prioritization of public health infrastructure and services. All these aspects collectively may put forth challenges in achieving the SDG goals by the end of this decade. The scale and the pace of efforts required to achieve the goals will come at a cost that will aggravate the already strained emerging economies recovering from the unprecedented outflows of capital on account of the pandemic situation. India has been committed towards expanding affordable energy access to last mile electrification and ensuring energy security for its citizens. Under the Saubhagya scheme launched in 2017, India has achieved the goal of electrifying 100% willing households over a short period of time. According to a recent study, almost all the Indian households are connected to the grid, with another 0.33% relying on off-grid electricity sources. The Government of India has taken various policy measures to have 40% of the installed power generation capacity from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030, with large-scale renewable energy projects being installed at a fast pace. India is also advancing the development of decentralized clean energy systems. In 2019, the Government of India launched another scheme called Kusum, which is one of the largest initiatives in the world to provide clean energy to more than 35 lakh farmers by solarizing their agricultural pump sets. This scheme is likely to generate employment opportunities equivalent to 755,000 job years for skilled and unskilled workers. This scheme will also lead to 10,000 megawatts of solar capacity addition through installation of small solar power plants. Adequate access to clean cooking is one of the key priority areas for our country. Over the past decade, India has also made significant strides in replacing the use of solid fuels with clean cooking options, primarily liquefied petroleum gas. In 2016, the Government of India had launched another scheme called Ujjwala, which aims to safeguard the health of women and children by providing them with clean cooking fuel through liquefied petroleum gas. So far, more than 100 million new LPG connections have been given under the scheme. Going further, we are looking forward to explore more cleaner options such as efficient electricity cooking, biogas and solar cookers. India is also having a special attention to the most vulnerable and climate sensitive regions, from the island territories in the south to the north cold desert regions. For example, three of the Union Territory of Ladakh in the upper Himalayas would be developed as a carbon neutral region. The key focus area remains on infrastructure development that includes solar parks, green hydrogen mobility projects, decentralized hydrogen power capacity, geothermal energy, solar power based micro irrigation, solar cooking devices, etc. Likewise, in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the Government of India is aiming to reduce the carbon footprint by replacing diesel-based power generation towards LNG-fired thermal power generation, grid-connected rooftop, and solar power generation. Similar is the case with the Lakshadweep Island, which we aim to decarbonize very shortly. We firmly believe that G20 members can join us in the transition journey and share the learnings that can be leveraged by countries, especially the archipelagic states who are faced with energy access related challenges. We firmly believe that commitments aimed to mobilize clean energy finance will speed up clean energy deployment, demonstrate and scale innovative clean technologies needed to ensure affordable access. India is firmly committed to working together with G20 countries in achieving the Glasgow Climate Pact, and will be a willing partner in collaborative and multilateral efforts in advancing coordinated actions towards common goals. I take this opportunity to recognize the efforts by the UNESCAP and the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Republic of Indonesia, for all efforts for organizing this virtual event. I firmly believe that this side event will enable knowledge sharing of successful initiatives that can be replicated across emerging economies and enable them to pave the road forward to enhance energy access through last mile connectivity to meet the SDG goals in a more inclusive manner. Thank you very much.
Mr. Visal Kapoor, thank you for your remarks, sir. Greetings from Indonesia. And we have now going to proceed to the keynote address that will be delivered by the Director General of Electricity, Ministry for Energy and Mineral Resources of Indonesia. Please welcome Mr. Rida Mulyana.
Distinguished speakers and participants, greeting to you all. Good afternoon from Jakarta. On behalf of the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources of Indonesia, Directorate General of Electricity, welcome you to today's G20 webinar series on assuring energy access and transition in archipelagic states. I am very pleased that we can gather virtually discussing on how to achieve universal energy access through our emission on global deal to accelerate energy transition. As we all aware that the rising global average temperature by the climate change poses a potential danger to the archipelagic countries. The increasing temperature has led to the rising sea level, which has significantly impacted island nations. Archipelagic countries are the front line of the climate emergency, and now they are less resilient to disasters. We need to work collectively to solve this challenge. Energy transition for archipelagic countries is critical to mitigate the climate change impact start from the frontline area. Indonesia, as the largest archipelagic country in the world, has ratified the Paris Agreement to reduce carbon emission and to limit the temperature rise globally to below 2 degrees, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius, compared to the pre-industrial level. In our submitted nationally determined contribution, Indonesia aimed to reduce 29% of CO2 emission, or equivalent to 314 million tons by 2030. While with international support, we can reduce even further to 41%, or equivalent to 446 million tons CO2. That is from energy sector only. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this year G20 Indonesia presidency underlined the energy transition present an opportunity to eradicate energy poverty. Closing the gap of energy access is at the top of agenda, especially for archipelagic countries, and the assurance of a just and equitable transition will be a key focus of effort over the coming decade in order to mitigate the potential negative socio-economic impacts. Archipelagic states, including small island developing states, face particular challenge in their delivery of a universal energy access. These countries are highly vulnerable to external factors ranging from natural disaster and climate change impact to supply chain disruption in distant parts of the world. At the same time, archipelagic countries are often has a problem with the interconnection and heavily reliant on the imported fossil fuel and distribution network. As a result, they are being left behind on Sustainable Development Goal 7, particularly on energy access. Indonesia is on its way to achieve universal energy access along with our energy transition agenda. Equitable energy access shall be reached by all of the people, especially in the frontier, outermost, and least developed island through several points. Firstly, through three main principles, which cover adequate power supply, acceptable quality of power supply, and affordable electricity prices. Secondly, as 2021, Indonesia electrification ratio has reached 99.45%, while the ratio of electrified villages reached 99.62%. For the national target of providing electricity in all areas, Indonesia aims to reach the 100% electrification ratio by the end of 2022. Lastly, in the supply side, we have set a target of 23% renewable energy in the national energy mix by 2025. By the end of 2021, we already have achieved 14% of renewable energy share in our national energy mix for the electricity generation. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia is transitioning toward cleaner energy utilization and access to support its net zero emission commitment by 2060 or earlier. To these objectives, some actions are being prepared and implemented. First, no additional new coal-fired power plants unless those which are already constructed or currently under construction. Second, additional power plant after 2030 will only come from new and renewable energy resources. We are going to have 21 gigawatt additional renewable energy power plant by 2030. And of this target, we already have 11.1 gigawatt electricity power by renewable energy sources. Third, converting diesel fuel power plants to renewable energy sources, such as from solar photovoltaic power plants that will produce around 1 gigawatt of cleaner energy. Fourth, enhance grid connectivity to mobilize indigenous renewable energy sources to the demand center. Fifth, provide the energy-saving lamp with the household-scale solar PV, electricity cylinder, and electricity charging stations to support the electricity access for the remote and outer islands. Lastly, our recent effort to accelerate the electrification is through a new electricity access installation program to electrify over 192,000 low-income households who are currently without direct access to electricity. All of these efforts will be the early step toward a more sustainable future for Indonesia. I hope Indonesia and other archipelagic countries can learn together in achieving energy access with clean, just, and sustainable energy transition. Again, thank you for coming to this webinar. I wish today's session allow us to exchange information and learn from each other best practice on how to contribute more significantly toward the achievement of universal energy access. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rida Mulyana. And right now, distinguished speakers and guests, we are proceeding to the first sessions, but hold on because we will first listen to some introductions and also scene setting that will be delivered by Mr. Hong Peng Liu, the Director, Energy Division, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and participants, good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's G20 virtual event on assuring energy access and the transitions in archipelagic states. The achievement of energy access to affordable and reliable modern energy through electrification and access to clean cooking fuels is one of the greatest challenges to the delivery of Sustainable Development Goal 7 by 2030. So the challenge exists on multiple fronts, as our distinguished speaker already mentioned, which include different kind of policies, infrastructures, technology, financing, and community engagement. So recognizing that dependence on imported fossil fuels has been a major source of economic vulnerability and a key challenge of small island developing states. For many decades, the G20 presidency in Indonesia has adopted a particular focus on this year for energy access in archipelagic states. So the efforts for the small island developing states concerning sustainable energy have been on the global agenda, including through the Barbados Declaration on achieving sustainable energy for all in small island developing states, the United Nations Secretary General's Sustainable Energy for All initiative, and sees accelerated modalities of action, as well known as the Samoa Pathway. However, more efforts are needed, in particular facing the current challenges of pandemics, climate challenge, and the volatile oil market. So G20 efforts on energy access and energy transition in archipelagic states will be hopefully accelerated towards universal access by 2030. In addition to delivery of basic access, there is also a need to consider households and utility, the reliability of supply, availability of energy efficient appliances, and assurance of good quality indoor air through ventilation of all play an important part in ensuring that the full scale of benefits is delivered. So SCAP is supporting the G20 presidency in Indonesia under the G20 Energy Transition Working Group towards a draft set of recommendations which we hope to present to the Energy Transition Ministers meeting later this year for their consideration. So I think today's discussion forms a key part in informing the program of work. We will hear good practices on different aspects. In addition, we will circulate a questionnaire to all of you, to the members of G20, and also to the experts and participants today, which will enable all speakers and participants, as well as members of G20, to provide their thought and their good practices as insight toward the development of those draft action plans and the recommendations. So I thank you very much. Back to you, MC. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hong Peng Liu, for your explanations. Distinguished speakers and participants, we're now about to begin the first session with the topic of promising developments. Before that, I would like to mention our distinguished speakers in the sessions. Mr. Honorable Jone Usamate, the Minister for Infrastructure, Meteorological Services, Lands and Mineral Resources of Fiji. Mr. Zainal Arifin, the EVP Engineering and Technology of PLN, or State Electricity Company of Indonesia. Mr. Simon Franklin, the Managing Director, IT Power of Australia. Mr. Matthew Gissi, the Director, Asia HDF Energy of France. And Dr. Luzerina Garniati, the Senior Consultant and Business Development Team Manager of Aquaterra. Also, this session will be moderated by Ms. Sandra Winarsa, the Program Development Manager Green Energy of HIVOS. Ms. Sandra has vast experience in the field of community development, particularly in renewable energy, environment and climate change education, gender inclusion, and local economic developments. Distinguished speakers and participants, please welcome our moderator for the first session, Ms. Sandra Winarsa. Ms. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, MC, for inviting and opening for the first session. Good morning as well for distinguished speakers and audiences in other part of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first session of today's G20 webinar series, Assuring Energy Access and Transitions in Archipelagic States. On behalf of the Indonesian Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources and UNSCAP, we thank you for your time and interest in joining us. My name is Sandra Winarsa and I'm very delighted to be here to be your moderator for today's first sessions. So we have a very excellent experts joining us today in the panel, and we hope to bring new insights into the opportunities, issues and challenges relating to universal energy access, particularly in the context of island-based countries. So for those of you who have questions or remarks for the speakers, please write them down in the Q&A chat box. And I also would like to invite the speakers to directly answer the relevant questions from participants in the chat box. If times allow, we will open for 1 or 2 burning questions from the floor that I will relay that to the panels. Without further ado, let's invite our first panelist. Our first speaker is the Honorable Hyun Usamate, Minister for Infrastructure, Meteorological Services, Lands and Mineral Resources of Fiji. Having served as a minister since February 2012, Mr. Usamate brings a wealth of experience in valuable policymaking insight to today's discussion. Fiji, as we know, is one of the major sub-regional economies playing a leading role in the Pacific. Good afternoon, Minister Samate.
Good afternoon, everybody. I speak today on the issues faced by the Pacific Island countries, or the PICs, as we often refer to them, the small island nations scattered across the Pacific with a population of less than 11 million people. As you know, our nations vary in resource endowments, but we all share similar sustainable development challenges. Remoteness, susceptibility to natural disasters, small populations, a small market, and then an excessive dependence on international trade, specifically on fuel imports. Because of this, we are exposed to the enduring challenges from lack of economies of scale, high transportation and communication costs, expensive public administration, and a need for sustainable infrastructure and rapidly evolving technologies. COVID-19 disrupted economic development and placed additional burden on the governments of the Pacific region. This exacerbated the development challenges as government diverted their resources to respond to the pandemic in order to manage their public health crisis. The lack of access to modern energy services has always been a significant factor caused by these development challenges. Energy, as you know, is the facilitator of economic activity and the delivery of key public services, including health, education, and infrastructure services. Clean cooking technologies reduce the incidence of respiratory disease and enable women and children to spend less time searching for fuel wood. Lack of energy access is widespread in the SIDS of the Pacific. Only 20% of households in the Pacific Islands have access to electricity. That is to say that an estimated 7 million Pacific Islanders out of the 11 million lack access to electricity. And electricity prices in the region are among the highest in the world. Access to electricity in the SIDS of the Pacific is low by international standards, equivalent to access rates in sub-Saharan Africa and slightly below the average for low-income countries. Challenges faced by policymakers in widening access to electricity in Pacific SIDS is significant. Access to electricity across the PICs varies as a result of difference in income levels, amount of resources available, and the level of development. In some of these PICs, access is limited to well below 20% of the population, and in others, the other nations are almost at 100%. The vast majority of unelectrified households in SIDS of the Pacific reside in rural areas, and this justifies a focus on rural electrification. Households in rural areas are usually far from our electricity grids, and connecting these households to the grid is a huge economic challenge, given the low levels of demand, a low population density, and geographical constraints. Off-grid electrification is far more feasible, but it involves significant upfront costs for households and governments, and these upfront costs are often beyond the capacity of our rural households to fund, given the lack of cash income and available credit. Some governments, such as for Fiji, have fully subsidized solar home systems to rural and maritime communities, while agencies such as the World Bank, the ADB, the European Investment Bank assist by providing grants and equity for some projects. But we are beginning to see a structural shift in the Pacific Islands as countries move away from fossil fuel, moving towards renewable forms of energy. Most of our PICs have largely untapped resources of renewable energy, but require a lot of substantial public and private investment to fully harness their potential. In many PICs, renewable energy applications exist both in grid-connected and off-grid systems. In particular, solar energy applications are feeding the grid in island nations such as Nauru, Niue, Samoa, and Tuvalu. Similarly, hydropower is being used in Fiji, in Papua New Guinea, and in Samoa. Wind energy is exploited in Fiji and Vanuatu, and geothermal energy has been successfully harnessed in Papua New Guinea. So these are signs that the PICs are moving towards energy transition. For the PICs, on a broad assessment, there are 4 key drivers towards clean energy transition. The first is the high cost of imported fossil fuels. The world market price, especially for crude oil, which is one of the most important fossil fuels, has proven to be subject to extreme fluctuations. On the other hand, the cost of renewable energy, which was on a downward trend before COVID-19, especially for technologies such as solar and wind. Second, the second driver of the clean energy transition is attaining national energy security through improved energy accessibility, diversification, and reduction in dependence on imported fossil fuels as the dominant source of energy. Clean energy provides a better alternative for economic progress and for social development. The third driver is the PIC's experience with severe and intense natural disasters that cause significant damage to communities and our economies. Hence, the PICs have taken on the responsibility and leadership towards action in mitigation of anthropogenic caused climate-related events. The fourth driver is the availability of green financing, very critical for us, and the de-risking tools for clean energy technologies. Green bonds, grants, equity financing, to name a few, have been instrumental in the PIC's clean energy transition. Oil accounts for about 80% of the primary energy consumption in the Pacific Island countries, and transportation accounts for about 75% of world consumption, while electricity generation accounts for more than 20%. With the exception of Papua New Guinea, none of the PICs have fossil fuel reserves and are entirely dependent on imported fossil fuel. And since fuel is traded into the international markets, PICs have to use their foreign reserves and are therefore highly vulnerable to volatile fuel prices. Transitioning to clean energy would imply lower fuel imports and increase in foreign reserves. In the small economies of the Pacific Island countries, with relatively low export earnings and a high dependence on foreign aid, the high prices of fossil fuel have negatively impacted growth. Expanding access to sustainable energy to the majority of the Pacific Islands is a considerable challenge. It requires allocation of financial resources by governments and development partners operating in the Pacific. The needed resources are significant, but not beyond the capacity of governments and our development partners to deliver over the long term. PICs need to invest in renewable energy production to mitigate the risk of the global oil shocks and create a self-sufficient power supply system, a crucial step towards sustainable development and energy security in the region. Enhanced partnerships and collaborations are key to clean energy transition. This includes collaboration between different governments in the region to synchronize their activities, avoid duplication through knowledge, experience sharing, and increase the process efficiency and build our enabling policies. Stronger collaborations between government bodies and non-government bodies, civil society and community-based organizations, as well as public-private partnerships could facilitate more energy projects and programs. Academic and training institutions also have a very critical role in capacity building. And finally, strengthened partnerships between Pacific Island countries and multilateral and bilateral organizations could support the funding of clean energy transition and work towards resilient and sustainable development in the Pacific Island countries. Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Usamate. I think that was very comprehensive view from Fiji on this particular key development. Thank you so much. Our next speaker, please welcome Mr. Zainal Arifin, the Executive Vice President of Engineering and Technology for Indonesia State-Owned Electricity Company, PLN. Indonesia itself has made a great stride towards universal energy access to electricity, and it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Arifin to the floor. Mr. Arifin.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of PLN, I would like to share with you about how the technology enabling the energy transition in the archipelagic state, and in this case, especially for Indonesia. I would like to start with who we are. Actually, PLN is one of the largest Indonesia state-owned company within more than 100 billion US dollar, and the revenue is about 19 billion US dollar per year. So we are a utility company that operate the single solution for powering generation, for transmitting generation, distributing generation, and also directly servicing the customer. In power generation, actually, Indonesia has 63.3 gigawatt, and also for the transmission, we have more than 131,000 megawatt megawatt ampere transformer. And also for the distribution, we own and operate almost 1 million kilometer circuit around Indonesia. In terms of customer, right now, today, we already had over 83 million customer around Indonesia. Next. In terms of electricity grid, because we are archipelagic country, archipelagic state, so we have no one single grid, but we have several grid system. For the Indonesia, at least we have 3 stages. The 7 high voltage, 150 to 170, 75 and 500 kV. And also we have 200 medium voltage, 20 kV, and also more than 900 low voltage off grid below 400 V. It make the how to providing electricity is not simple in Indonesia because we have highly variability. So for powering Indonesia, actually we have several power generation, can be fossil fuel and renewable energy. For the power generation by fossil, we still heavily depend on the coal fire. In terms of capacity, the coal fire contribute to 50%, but for the fuel mix is still more than 66%. For the renewable energy, consists of hydro, geothermal, mini hydro, wind energy, and also PV solar. The overall contribution today is in terms of production electricity is 12.4%. But for powering the small scattered isolated area, we still depend on the diesel. So why we still on the diesel? Because the diesel, even though is the most expensive power generation we have, and still have produced CO2 emission about 2.6 kilograms CO2 per liter, and also the solar we use mostly already import. We the location in small isolated area, it's make some challenging issue for us. But next, why we still use diesel? Because diesel have so many advantages: excellent ramping rate, quick start time, plant load efficiency, the compact, fixed delivery and construction very fast, less space required. Power plant, for example, in the Mentawai, and also we already tried small gasification and also hybrid between PV and wind, and also the last one is small hybrid between PV, diesel, and battery. For the technology, biomass is not success. The small gasification is not success. The hybrid PV between not success. The only one success is smart hybrid microgrid, combining PV solar with diesel, the existing diesel and battery. Next, how about the green hydrogen? Actually, we also try to implement this technology in Indonesia context, but the problem is still not feasible yet. Even though the technically is already mature in other country. Because the small capacity isolated location and still poor infrastructure. For the powering the small isolated area for archipelago state, actually we have so challenging issue here. Not only technical, but also non-technical. The technical thing about capability of the technology. I think that's all of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arifin, for your insight. Yeah, I think we are fully agreed about the technical and on the non-technical challenges you've mentioned, but we really would like to appreciate, the effort of PLN for the desalination ambition that PLN just, pushed that through in the last couple of months ago. Okay, thank you, Pa Zainal Arifin. Our third speaker for the sessions will join us from Australia. Mr. Simon Franklin is the managing director of the consulting firm IT Power and has been involved with the development of over 30 solar wind farms with a combined capacity of over 1.5 gigawatt. IT Power have significant experience in leading renewable energy projects in the Pacific. And Mr. Franklin will share us some of his insights into the development and operation of these microgrids. Mr. Franklin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and thank you also to the organisers of this forum to give me an opportunity to speak to you all today. I'd like to begin just by giving you a brief background on who we are at ITP. So we are a specialist renewable energy and net zero consulting firm who's been operating in electrification projects for over 40 years. The project started in the UK in 1981 and has been in Australia, the Pacific and the Southeast Asian region since 2003. We have completed over 100 projects in renewable energy microgrids for small islands and remote isolated grids. Next slide, please. Next slide again, please. I just wanted to run through some of the recent projects we've completed and some of the lessons we've learned from these projects. First project I wanted to touch on is the Pacific Energy Development Acceleration Program. This was a project funded by the New Zealand government looking at a number of projects across 4 Pacific Island countries. Those were Tuvalu, Samoa, Tonga and the Cook Islands. The outcomes of this project led to a number of remote islands being given access to reliable 24-hour electricity for the first time. These were particularly outer islands of the Cook Islands and Tuvalu, which previously only had access to 4 hours of electricity each day. The main focus of the program was the deployment of solar and battery systems on these islands supported by the existing diesel infrastructure, or in some cases new diesel infrastructure. The program also included a number of feasibility studies for larger systems on the main islands, looking at reduction in diesel capacity and introduction of more renewable energy, and also roadmaps towards 100% supply of renewable energy for Samoa and a 50% supply of renewable energy for Tonga. Next slide, please. So one of the things we learned out of these projects as we implemented them was that it's significantly more challenging to deploy renewable energy in very remote island environments than it is on the main grids. In some cases, the only way that we could get to these islands was to be on a boat for over 24 hours. And the only way to get equipment onto the islands was to offload off the main ship onto smaller lighters and run them across the reef and unload by hand. So all equipment needed to be broken down into very small capacities. Obviously, there are immense climate challenges in these small island states, including cyclones and flooding risks, with a number of these islands or atolls no more than 1.5 meters above sea level, and this leads to a number of challenges. It's also difficult working across so many different countries and islands with different jurisdictions and focuses, and getting access to land is always quite challenging in these environments as well. Next slide, please. Another important project that we've completed recently is the Christmas Island Energy Sector Program in Kiribati. This program was seeking to expand access to electricity to the people of Christmas Island, and also provide electricity to future population developments on the island. There were a number of small isolated diesel grids that already existed, and these were joined by a medium voltage backbone that provided more reliable electricity. A number of solar installations were also included to minimize the amount of diesel used in the system. There were upgrades made to some existing hybrid systems for other isolated communities, and a major focus of the program was to provide technical assistance and capacity building for the local communities. So fundamentally, we believe the only way that we're going to get successful programs in these regions is to build capacity within the local communities to operate and maintain these projects. So we had a member of our team embedded in the local community for an 18-month period in order to transfer that knowledge, and then we continue to maintain those relationships from Australia post-commissioning of the projects. Next slide, please. Some of the important lessons learned there was that it is key to have the right local person embedded in the community, and it's critical to have a long-term relationship with the community to build lasting relationships and transfer knowledge that allows the systems to be maintained in a reliable manner. There are always logistical issues with such remote sites, and in fact we lost about half of the equipment for this project when one of the ships carrying equipment was incorrectly loaded and sunk in Suva Harbour in Fiji. So having proper risk mitigation and backup is critically important to these projects. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip this project, so could we go to the next slide? And then the next slide after that. So the final project I want to talk to you about, which may not be reflected in the slides there, is a project that we did for a roadmap for electrification and 100% renewable energy in the FSM. And again, this was an important project around planning to decarbonise the electricity supply for the FSM, and also provide 100% access to electricity for the communities there. A number of important lessons learnt there around how to coordinate and provide long-term planning for decarbonisation and electricity access for remote islands. Ultimately, the project has been a major success, and there are a number of projects that are coming out of the back of this scoping study and roadmap that are being implemented currently. Now, I've come to the end of my time, so I will wrap up there, but thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Simon. For the real examples you provide to us today. And very agree with your key points about building local capacities and transfer of knowledge for long-term impact. Moving on, our fourth speaker will be talking about the potential for a technology that being discussed more and more as time goes on nowadays. Mr. Matthew Geze works with the HDF Energy, a French independent power producer dedicated to hydrogen power. Matthew will provide us with his insight into the potential of hydrogen in the context of medium-sized. Please.
Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank SCAP and ESDM for the invitation. We are very glad to share today our view about how we can bring energy transitions to archipelagic states. A few words about that. When we talk about energy transition in such a context, it's not only about energy transition, it's mainly about sustainability and resilience. And I think Mr. Usamate and Pak Zainal mentioned that very well. So now I will explain how HDF can accompany this transition and deliver sustainable and affordable power into islands. So next slide, please. But a quick words on HDF and who we are. We are developer and APP. So our main job is to coordinate with key ministries and national utilities to bring them solutions into contexts like island grids. Next slide, please. And we discussed about the challenges to develop infrastructure into islands. And it's not related to energy only, it's related to telecom, health, to any sectors. The diesel genset could be a solution for reasons mentioned by Pak Zainal, and the alternatives can be renewable energies. However, we see that solar and wind, despite the fact they are very, very affordable and they can be deployed very quickly, they have some challenges related to intermittency and to the fact they are non-dispatchable. And we believe that this is something very critical for a utility like PLN in Indonesia, for example, but not only. We see that worldwide utilities can challenge by handling the intermittent power for solar and wind. What we try to do at HDF is to use hydrogen in order to deliver to the grid a firm, stable, and dispatchable power in order to bring comfort to the utility on the fact that the renewable energies won't disturb the balance of the system. So next slide, please. So I will explain very briefly now how it works and how we can deliver to the grid a non-intermittent power. So firstly, about the mindset. Our mindset is not to deliver as much power as possible, but our mindset is to understand what will be the need of PLN, for example, in Indonesia, what amount of power they need into the grid, and according to that, we will tailor-made a power plant to be sure that we will deliver to the grid what they need only. So we will combine renewable energies to hydrogen and batteries. And you can go to the next slide, and I will give an example of what we are doing in French Guiana. French Guiana is not an island, but is like an island because it's a remote area surrounded by sea and forest. So it's an island grid somehow. The diversity of the mix is limited. The size of the mix, the grid is limited also. So we see that the difficulties that Pak Zainal mentioned during his speech, EDF in France are facing the same issues on the grid like French Guiana. So we propose the EDF there to develop a renewable power plant to maximize the integration of renewable energies into the grid. And this is what we did the past few years. Now the project is under construction. And we were talking about technology also earlier. So what I would like to underline by that slide is to make it clear that despite its island context, despite its hydrogen, despite the fact the technology sounds very new, we can demonstrate that such projects is bankable. And as an example, you can see on that slide that among the lenders, we don't have only development institutions, we have also commercial banks like SMBC and BNP Paribas. And this is the type of projects we are developing in Indonesia. So as you can see on that slide, we are developing a project called Sumba, in Sumba Island. You can see the logo of the key stakeholders which are supporting today this project. Sumba is a typical example of the island grid in East Indonesia. As you can see on the map there, there is not only Sumba, there are a lot of islands in Eastern Indonesia, and our ambition with the renewable power plants is to help PLN to diversify the grid in Eastern Indonesia, to diminish the dependence on diesel gensets without threatening the stability of the grid, while diminishing the cost of electricity generation. We do believe those two criteria are really important: the stability of the grid, because this is the main job of a utility, but also diminishing the cost of electricity generation. And this is what we can bring in Sumba and hopefully in Eastern Indonesia on the long run, with support from key institutions like ADB, GIZ, Multilateral program from UK FCDO and HIVOS. So next slide, please. So I talked about Indonesia. This is where I'm located, despite the fact I'm French. I'm based in Jakarta to develop HDF energy in Asia. Indonesia is the typical example of archipelagic states, but Philippines is also a good one. There are a numerous amount of isolated grids in the Philippines. We are doing our first steps in Mindanao, where we signed some weeks ago a cooperation agreement with key stakeholders, among them Mindanao Development Authority. What we have started to do in Indonesia, we are duplicating it in Mindanao and Philippines. And this cooperation agreement is a great milestone for us. So next and last slide, please. So as a conclusion, I would like to say that Philippines, Indonesia are key for us because of obvious geographic reasons, but not only. We also look at Southeast Asia and markets like Japan and India, where they have islands, but they also have isolated areas on their mainland, and they have also challenges at grid edges to balance the grid. And we do believe hydrogen and renewable power plants can be an answer. So thank you, everyone. I remain available if you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Thank you so much. And we really hope that, the plan for empowering Eastern Indonesia, and we will fully support on that regard. So look forward to have more progress on that. I just would like to remind everyone, please do type in your questions if you have to certain speakers that we have today in the chat box. We will answer. We will give back the question at the later stage if we still have time, or the speaker could actually type in their own answer in the chat box too. Moving on. I think this is our final speaker, and I'm very happy that finally it is, female speaker speaking in this very distinguished, forum. I would like to welcome Ms. Lucerina Garniati. Ms. Nia will outline some learnings from Aquaterra's work on Orkney Island in Scotland. She has more than 15 years of experience across public-private research NGO sector in the UK and also in Southeast Asia. She's recently established a center for sustainability and resource management, and also servicing as honorary assistant professor at Heriot-Watt University. So Ms. Nia will discuss the Orkney Island grid, which combine wind, tidal, and hydrogen in the island setting, providing useful case for today's economy. Ms. Nia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sandra, for the introduction. Thank you very much, Ms. Sandra, for the introduction. Can I have the first slide on, please? Thank you very much. So again, it's an honor to be here. Thank you very much to having me in this panel. I'm just going to run briefly through some of our lessons learned through the Orkney Islands, which, as Ms. Sandra mentioned, have experience through the journey of developing wind, tidal, and hydrogen, and also now collaborating with other islands across the countries, including Indonesia. Next slide, please. Just the Orkney story. Next slide, please. So yes, Orkney itself, it consists of 70 islands. 20 of those it's inhabited, so it's quite small groups, but quite scattered, and some of those have different infrastructures than others. It is home, however, to about 50,000 people, and landscape-wise, it is home to prehistorical villages, ancient tombs, ruined places, and also it's one of UNESCO's World Heritage Site. So when earlier on colleagues mentioned it's not just about technology, there are other considerations that are in play, including cultural heritage, as well as the people and within that landscape that needs to interact with the energy system and the transition process. And then finally, Orkney itself have moved from poverty to the third highest gross disposable household income in the UK. And they rely heavily in the sustainable livelihood side through tourism, fisheries, farming, and renewable energy. Next slide, please. Just to give an idea, Orkney is also a modern island of sustainable energy technology and systems. It includes installations such as onshore wind, offshore wind, both floating and founded, as well as the home of some of the quite known wave, tidal, and floating solar devices tested and implemented on the islands. We're now starting to look at hydrogen and batteries for storage system, as well as looking at the demand side from industrial and commercial activities. Next slide, please. Some of the highlights of the Orkney journey through the sustainable energy community development includes the first grid-connected wind turbine in the UK was installed in Orkney at Costa Head in the 1950s, and then the first large-scale experimental turbines was also tested in Orkney in Burger Hill in the late 80s, and that actually provides the case and the lessons, and also paving the way for the wind energy industry that we know today. So that legacy kind of brought Orkney to its current situation, where it produces about over 130% of electricity demand through renewables. But we also know energy is not only about electricity. So even though it produces more than it needs in terms of electricity, we start to have to look at other energy consumptions and how do we meet that with low carbon energy generation. So we look at we have facilitated and helped the development of over 30 marine energy technologies on the islands. Through that, the supply chain gets bigger, and through that comes about 2,500 maritime support operations, the learning from the operations alone, and also to show that energy transition is actually not an instant process, and it's a parallel between the existing conventional energy with the new innovation. Orkney still handles about 10% of UK's oil production. And finally, of all of the statistics around renewables and the innovation it is involved in, I think it's quite important to state that within that space, outside of the business, outside the policy, and then outside of the cultural spheres, there's also a significant drive within the Orkney community to embed that learning into an education and capacity building element, to show that we have around 450 to 500 MSc PhD graduates that are directly involved in the industry. So they are facing the challenges in person, getting involved in the development of these systems in practice, so that when they do become professionals and are expected to make decisions, they have that exposure already throughout their learning. Next slide, please. And just very briefly on Reflex, we've been talking about the generation side of energy in terms of electricity and others. Reflex tries to then look into how to strategically distribute energy where and when it is most needed. So with the integrated energy systems, this system could decide and analyze and store energy when it is mostly generated, and then distribute that to the locations and at the time that it is then most needed through the grid distribution. Next slide, please. Speaking about distribution, we also look into storage, and for this, hydrogen is one of the things that we look into storing energy. In here, some of the projects that have been ongoing is looking into how to integrate transport into the mix. So the excess electricity is converted into hydrogen fuel, and that hydrogen fuel is stored and distributed using to be used in harbor operations, ferries, and more recently actually through for experimental aircrafts, so that it can provide a low carbon travel air travel system. Next slide, please. And just very quickly to round that off, how that links with the Indonesian collaboration. Next slide, please. So the UK and Indonesia have collaborated for some years on a number of low carbon initiatives, one of which that is still ongoing is the global British Council Going Global Partnership. That is an academic and business partnership between ITS, Harriet Watt as an example, Aquaterra and Technoscience, where the energy transition for blue energy to support blue economy is implemented, but also quite a significant effort is pushed through this collaboration, which we call Mentari program, which is a cooperation between the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources in Indonesia as well as the British Embassy in Jakarta. It's delivered through a range of different sections, but mainly we try to put that UK lessons learned, the successful ones and the not so successful ones, through an UK energy transition lessons learned, and including different training activities and long-term planning, including net zero analysis and blue energy analysis. Next slide, please. Just an example of what we're trying to produce is looking at how intelligently look at the opportunities by interconnectivity, as well as looking how at energy is not just electricity, but also touching on other sources in the marine environment. Next slide, please. These last two slides just give an illustration of when we speak about energy transition, it looks like a singular event, but actually it's an overlay of issues around policy, brokerage. As an example, on policy, produce lots of studies and roadmap exercises collaboratively, as well as in the brokerage side, I think, TA support and brokering service. One of them is in the feasibility studies around Buton Island, as well as Katingan for diesel conversion, and so on. And the last slide, I think. Please, next slide. Just to show that what we've been done in the policy and brokerage needs to directly be implemented. Hence, the demonstration element of Mentari starts to create knowledge product and also implementation, as well as the collaboration and networking that links and bridge all of these knowledge base into one space. I think that in a nutshell is what I could share with you at this point. Happy to pick up any discussions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Nia, for the presentations. Just a little bit of info that all slides will be available at the end of the sessions that for participants to download. And unfortunately, due to time constraint, it is, we won't be able to pick up any question at this stage, but hopefully you would stay for the second sessions, and you can ask for, more time for question and answer. I think that's all for today's first sessions. On behalf of the committee, I really would like to thank all of our distinguished speakers and also participants. It was very, delightful and fruitful information that we have from today's panels. The planet is in crisis. Basically, the acceleration of energy transition may be challenging, but as we witnessed today, cleaner solutions are really in reach. I now give the floor back to our MC to guide us for the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Sandra. And let's give a round of applause for all the speakers and moderator. Yes, distinguished speakers and participants, we're going to proceed to the second session. We're all thankful for the presentations, the great presentations, giving us insights from different countries. And now, in the second sessions, we'll be listening to the presentations and discussions about collaboration beyond the national energy sectors. The speakers are Mr. Priyanka Vijayatunga, the Chief of Energy Sector Group, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of Asian Development Bank. Also, Dr. Irene Generale, Senior Advisor to the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition. And the next speaker is Ms. Lisa Tinchert, the Director, Energy Program, Indonesia, ASEAN, and also Ms. Koin Etwati, the SPC Pacific Community, and last but not least, Mr. Tim Reber, National Renewable Energy Laboratory. The session will be moderated by Mr. Hong Peng Liu as the Director of Energy Division of UN ESCAPE. He is currently leading the energy team in ESCAPE to promote energy cooperation with focus on implementation of SDG in achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Energy Connectivity for Regional Economic Integration. Please welcome our moderator for the second session, Mr. Hong Peng Liu. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Monica, for this introduction and the kind word. I really appreciate our moderator, Ms. Sandra, for a very good session and discussion, and all the good speakers to share about very good practices, different projects, and also technologies. So for the second session, we will mainly focus the other aspects of energy access, like from financing investment, from gender perspectives, from community engagement, and also from good practices we have just demonstrated in different places. So as also mentioned in the first session, we have a very tight schedule. For each of the speaker, we have 6 minutes. I think you will see on the screen your time, and then just control your time. We will hopefully leave some time for questions and answers after the speakers. So without further ado, I would like to go out to our first speaker, Mr. Priyanka Vijayatunga, who is the Chief of Energy Sector Group, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department from the Asian Development Bank. He actually brings his experience from energy sector policies and regulations from Sri Lanka before he joined the ADB. But he is also leading the ADB group and to support sustainable energy development in Asia Pacific. So he will be speaking about the role of public and private finance in delivering energy access. So Mr. Priyanka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hong Peng. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. As Hong Peng said, I will take you through the role of public and private finance in energy access related investments, and particularly concentrating on Asian Development Bank's experience. To start off with, of course, our motto is that energy is central to inclusive socio-economic development, but the expansion of energy systems has come at the cost of harmful impacts on our climate and environment. ADB's new energy policy, which we put out last year, will support our developing member countries in the critical and urgent task of expanding access to reliable, affordable, and clean energy. And in fact, the energy policy has 5 principles which we put out last year, and out of which the most important ones are the 3 first principles. That is, the whole energy policy is centered around securing energy for for a prosperous and inclusive Asia and the Pacific. And this, of course, supports efforts to bring affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy to all our developing member countries, and particularly those who are not who are lagging behind energy access. And then the second most important, but in parallel, equally important, is building sustainable and resilient energy future. We are, of course, we concentrate on climate change related, interventions, the challenges, and building climate resilient, disaster resilient infrastructure. And the third is supporting institutions. We can't do any of these things until we support the institutions and create an enabling environment for private sector participation and make sure that we have good governance in these institutions. Then, of course, the other two principles are regional cooperation and integration, and the last but not least is integrated cross-sectoral operations to maximize the developmental impact, which is very important when it comes to energy sector development. So as I said, the first three principles are the most important as far as we are concerned, because we are looking at energy access, we are looking at the challenges faced as a result of climate change, and then of course strengthening the institutions and their governance so that the investments can flow at a fast rate. So as far as ADB's priority for energy access is concerned, we support essential energy services in the poorest and most vulnerable countries, particularly including small island developing states. Then we encourage them to use low carbon and renewable energy sources, enhance energy security, and sustainable and just energy transition. It cannot be just for the sake of transition, but we have to make sure it is just transition. And then we promote inclusiveness in energy access activities, particularly bringing women and children focused interventions, and the poor, the racial and ethnic minorities, and so on. Improving energy access services by involving building capacity in communities, in planning, operations, and maintaining the systems and commercial services of the systems, and then considering broader community needs for safety and social development, such as street lighting, healthcare centers, and schools. Then developing appropriate business models to ensure sustainable use. And yes, if you look at ADB's energy access related investments, actually we started counting energy access numbers from about 2008. Now we have almost 14 years passed since then, and we have provided almost to access to about 40 million people, just to 45 million people, and we have spent about $12 billion and roughly about $1 billion a year, as far as we are concerned. And then if you look at the energy access specific projects in different regions, let me show you a few. And Pacific Renewable Energy Investment Facility, which is about $200 million, covering 11 Pacific islands. This is to support small scale renewable energy projects. Then we have the Cook Islands Renewable Energy Development Project, which is $35 million to fund 18 megawatts of solar power plants across 6 islands, saving roughly about 1 million liters of diesel a year, which is very important for these countries. And then Kiribati South Tarawa Renewable Energy Project, $14 million to support solar power projects, including battery storage and floating solar, which is quite innovative. Then we have in Tonga Cyclone Gita Recovery Project, where we spend about $7 million to reconstruct and climate and disaster proof electricity network damaged by the cyclone. Then Papua New Guinea, you have Port Moresby power grid development project, and then again there is upgradation of the transmission network. Then if you come into Vanuatu energy access project, $20 million to replace diesel power plants with hydropower and extend distribution network, both Espiritu Santo and Malekula. And then Federal States of Micronesia, again renewable energy development project, $15 million to finance solar power and battery projects, including solar home systems. Then Maldives, we have put in $55 million to invest in solar, diesel, battery hybrid systems, quite innovative at the time. And then on the Southeast Asian side, in the Philippines, we have put in solar hybrid pilot project in Malala Luzon Island, for $0.5 million. Then another innovative intervention is AC Energy Green Bond project. Then Bugos wind farm project, $20 million to finance 150 megawatt wind power project in municipality of Bugos. And then in Indonesia, sustainable and reliable energy access program, Western and Central Java, $600 million to support PLN to provide electricity access to over 100 million people in Java Island. Then we have geothermal project in Indonesia, 110 megawatt geothermal power plants in Central and West Java. Now, if you look at the role of multilateral development bank like us, it is provide grants, concessional finance, and technical assistance. We have different forms of financing coming in to sovereign energy access projects, including clean cooking. And then financing pilot projects to showcase innovative tech. When it comes to innovative technologies, it's very important that we pilot them first before we really expand it for commercial level activities, commercial level implementation or replication. And in this regard, we are looking at things like solar cooling, battery storage, floating solar, smart mini grids, and efficient cook stoves. Then provide equity investments and low interest loans off-grid, particularly off-grid and distributed renewable energy companies directly or through financial intermediaries. And then develop dedicated facilities or funds to enable aggregation of small-scale energy access projects and allow for greater private sector financing, for instance, through national development banks. Then the most important, last but not as important, is policy reforms to promote and increase uptake of off-grid, hybrid and decentralized renewable energy solutions, particularly in remote areas. It's important that we bring in required policies and regulations to encourage uptake of these systems so that we can eliminate energy access issues in the region. With that, I stop here and would like to come back to questions as and when it comes to. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka, for the presentation. I think this is a great presentation you see from 2008 to 2021. So how this ADB's investment in energy access is increasing. And I really think multi-development bank plays a very important role in energy access in particular. And like ADB, World Bank did a lot of projects on energy access for these small island states. But that's not enough. As you said, how to work with the private sector and private sector with the financing, with the technology. I think that's very important. How to establish a kind of institutional mechanism to set up this kind of mechanism to encourage more private financing for energy access. I think that's a very good kind of presentation. Thank you so much. I also encourage our audience, if you have any questions, you can use this chat box to share your questions or to directly address to our speakers, or you can address to everyone. Our organizing team will just collect the questions. Either our speakers will address your questions through the chat box, or if we have time left, we will just have some discussion Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I would like to move to our second speaker. This Dr. Irina Jenner-Haxia, who is a senior advisor of the Global Women's Network for the Energy. So Dr. Jenner is the president of Global Forum for Sustainable Energy, and was a long time vice president for REN 21. So that is for Renewable Energy Policy Network 21, and also served as Australian ambassador to the People's Republic of China and Mongolia from 2012 to 2017, and also Australian ambassador to Brazil and Suriname from 2017 to 2020. Although Ambassador Irina, worked for the embassies, but she is very active for energy transition and sustainable energy development. I personally met you in different occasions during energy meetings in New York, in Beijing. I thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation. So Dr. Jenna Aksher is an honor to have you joining, and she will talk about this gender and energy access. Dr. Irena, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I believe that this is a problem that is a global problem. It's also a problem that is not limited to any country. It's really a serious problem in all regions of the world. And we feel that one reason why we need to address this topic of underrepresentation is it's not just because equal participation of women and men is a human right, but it is also to the benefit of societies, to the benefit of families, to the benefit of communities, to the benefit of companies, that we can draw on the wisdom that is available in women and men, and for the energy transitions, which are complicated, as we have heard, and pose many challenges. It is truly important that we can draw on the combined wisdom of women and men in all dimensions of the energy transition. In our view, the Global Women's Network of the Energy Transitions view one of the best ways of actually supporting women who are already active in sustainable energy, and also to bring more women to the sector of sustainable energy, is to create networks among women that are interested. And why would anybody want to create such a network? Well, here on the slide you see the current figures, which show that women are at best presented with 32% of the labor force in sustainable energy, much lower when it comes to STEM professions, and when we disaggregate according to regions, then sometimes the numbers are even slower. Next slide, please. So in a number of countries that also have challenges with energy access, women have started to create networks. For example, in Rwanda, the network has given itself the mission to leverage the number of women, their opportunities and influence in the Rwandan energy sector. In other regions, networks have given themselves different aims and missions. I have on the slide the example of the Spanish Association, for example. Next slide, please. Networks can also have very different legal forms, fundings, target audiences, and main activities. It is wise to choose all these, make decisions about these issues in a joint fashion, so that the legal form actually supports the activities that a network wishes to carry out. Next slide, please. Activities that have been carried out, for example, by the Women's Network in Pakistan are on the slide that you see now. They go from developing the STEM pipeline to working on policy and regulation, and there's really no limit to what the activities can be. Next slide. Important practicalities should be considered. Next slide. And after a certain amount of time, it would be great to evaluate whether the mission has been accomplished or whether there are new emerging suggestions and expectations or new external developments such as new laws, new business opportunities, etc. I would like to encourage you all to consider creating such a network in island states. Islands have in and of themselves the characteristic that their energy communities tend to be small. It's even harder in small communities for women to connect. Therefore, such an intentional network is a very excellent idea to pursue. The Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition, which has mentored also over 500 women from 40 countries already in its 5 years of existence, and supports actively regional and national networks of women in energy, would be very happy to assist in the establishment of such a network. Next slide, please. Next slide. Get in touch with us. Also self-register on the platform that we have created, which is called Women Experts in Energy, where close to 3,000 international experts have already self-registered. And yes, if there are any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them in the chat or after this session. Thank you again for having me, and congratulations on this very important event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jen Heckscher, for this very enlightening kind of presentation, especially how your Global Women's Network to support creating the women's network. I really think a woman plays a very important role in energy transition. If you see, in particular for energy access, they are the end users in the household, for energy. They are also at the same time producers for energy, especially when you have a decentralized renewable energy system. So I think your idea to have this kind of network in small island states, that is really a very good idea. It could be also support those kind of networks, these women in different island countries to work together, and then to develop a kind of development opportunities at the same time to support energy transition. Thank you very much for your time and for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Ms. Lisa Tinshert, and she is the Director of Energy Program with the GIZ, where she leads the Renewable Energy for Electrification program, and is also Project Manager for Clean, Affordable and Secure Energy for Southeast Asia project in Indonesia. So Lisa will be presenting on the power of collaboration. As we mentioned, the partnership collaboration is very important for energy transition. So Lisa's presentation will focus on the power of collaboration. So Lisa, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Honka, for your kind introduction and also for the opportunity to speak here today. So Indonesia has chosen energy as one of the three main themes of its G20 presidency, and this clearly shows the importance of the topic on global level, but also, of course, for Indonesia as an archipelagic nation. So for my presentation today, as introduced by Hongpeng, I'm looking at a specific perspective on how to achieve universal access in island states. So through the power of collaboration. So looking at the combination of the topic of renewable energy mini-grids with the modality of triangular cooperation. So next slide, please. Just a brief word on GIZ. So GIZ, one of the major topics we work on globally is on access to clean energy, and we are mandated to do so by the German government as part of their international development corporations globally. In Indonesia, GIZ also is implementing a series of projects on behalf of the government of Germany. And we've been active since more than 20 years, and we started a journey on the topic of rural electrification on in small islands. The slide you're seeing today, if you stay on that previous slide, thank you. You see the map of Indonesia, and it's quite similar to what you've heard also from the colleague of PLN, Pak Zainal Arifin, introducing the setup of Indonesia as an island nation. 7,000 islands, more than 600 grids, many small grids, so a particular challenge we're looking at here. But there's also a great success story on this slide deck. What you see, the different dots are the amount of mini-grids, that renewable energy mini-grids that have been installed under a program of the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. So these mini-grids have been installed. It's mainly 2/3 are PV, 1/3 is micro hydro. They've been developed in the past 10 to 15 years, installed by local engineers. They're operated and integrated with local communities, and they're supported by the government. And with this achievement, what you also see on the right-hand chart at the top, Indonesia is really a country that has is leading the development of IE mini-grids and has a very rich success story, a wealth of knowledge and capacity on these topics, and we believe this is also interesting for other countries. Moving to the next slide, looking at the topic of South-South cooperation. Indonesia is also a country where you can say it's a leader of South-South cooperation. We're looking back here at almost 70 years, the Asia-Africa Conference, 1955 in Bandung, looking at establishment of international cooperation and different principles, and really trying to foster this international cooperation between developing and emerging countries. At the 50-year celebrations of the summit, the Asia-Africa Summit 2005, this was also emphasized again with a renewed focus to address common challenges. So common challenges, I think these we know very well, it's the climate change challenge we're all facing, plus the Agenda 2030 and universal access to energy, one of it. In 2019, Indonesia established the Indonesia Aid, an agency that has an outward-looking character to foster global development cooperation from Indonesia. Come to my last slide. If you now look at, next slide please, combining these three aspects. On the one side, we have this wealth of experience in Indonesia on RE mini-grid development. On the other side, we have the global challenge of providing universal access to island nations, but not only stop there, it could also be decentralized energy supply solutions, for example, in countries in Africa. And if we then use the triangular cooperation mode to amplify and to increase the implementation of RE mini-grids. So basically, this is also a new initiative that is initiated as a cooperation between Indonesia and Germany as two G20 countries, with the objective to provide a platform and an initiative to target and cooperate with countries in Asia and Africa. This is a new initiative that will be implemented by GIZ together with the Indonesian Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. Why do we think this collaborative approach under triangular cooperation is efficient? Why do we think it will help us to achieve our targets for universal access faster? Basically, these countries, there's a lot of similarities between an island in Indonesia and also a decentralized energy supply challenge, for example, in Africa. So we're looking at similarities in terms of remoteness, a small community, but also abundance of renewable energy sources and a lack of modern energy access. Such a collaboration platform could also foster the aspect of peer learning. So learning on similar issues such as inclusive community-based approaches, sharing practical knowledge, such as what you see on the right-hand side. For example, GSZ has developed a do's and don'ts handbook on mini-grid development, so very practical things that can be shared from Indonesia, and developing an exchange, various exchange platforms. You see a photo there of a workshop we did in Indonesia with participants from Africa. So these type of networks and approaches can help to drive mini-grid implementation. So in conclusion, we believe a triangular approach for mini-grid upskilling can support, contribute to climate change mitigation, switching from fossil fuel-based solutions to renewable-based solutions, contribute to strengthening local economies through community-based approaches, and of course also progress on other goals of the Agenda 2030. So it's a nice example on how G20 collaboration, such as in this case between Germany and Indonesia, can really help to foster and collectively achieve universal access through triangular cooperation modality. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Lisa. Your presentation is really from the angle for how to enhance the collaboration among this North and the South, and also South-South cooperation. This triangular cooperation to support the energy access. If you see, this could be a very good practice, a lot of collaboration on energy access with the technology, with the financing and the policy support from the north side to the south and to the small island. But at the same time, there's among the developing countries, South-South cooperation also provided a lot of good examples and also support for to encourage energy, to promote energy access. And also GIZ is one of the donors contributed a lot of this kind of collaboration. And yourself, based in Jakarta, I think you have also worked a lot with the small islands in Indonesia, and your experience will be valuable. I hope you will share more with us during this process to develop an action plan for this Archipelagic state for energy access under this G20 initiative. I thank you very much for your presentation and look forward to working with you. Thank you. And our next speaker is Ms. Coin Atueti, works in the Pacific Community, SPC. And she's based in Micronesia regional office, and she is supporting this EU-funded project in Micronesia, sustainable energy and company measures, same renewable energy and energy efficiency for federal state of Micronesia. So Ms. Equity has worked in SPC at a regional energy program for the past 15 years on a wide range of policy planning and project implementation activities, and will now outline for us some of her learnings from the recent Clean Cooking for Life program. So that is also an aspect for energy access in addition to electrification. So clean cooking is another very important aspect. So over to you, Ms. Equity.
Hello. Thank you very much, Director. And I can start. Would I have my presentation up?
Yes, yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a time difference. I thought this conference is for tomorrow, FSM time. So I am sorry that I may be. Okay, so my name is Corinne Estuati, and I'm here in FSM Micronesia as the implementation advisor for EU-funded project. Our project basically just looks at improving access to electricity in one of the states here in FSM, and also look at policy review and
Hello, Ms. Tuati. We lost you. Hello? Hello, Mr. Tuati, can you hear us?
made
Okay.
up of Pacific Island countries and territories in the Pacific. 26 member countries. Yeah, can you just go through the slide and it may be too big. So the Pacific community is made up of have members in member countries, 26 member countries. We have 4 founding members, the main partners to the Pacific community, and where we started off with the Cooking for Life project. It's in mainly looking at working with the atoll countries, Kiribati, Tuvalu, and then Marshall Islands, and these were the initiatives. And also Fiji, we started off with Fiji, and then other NGOs and private sector got engaged. So each country has different capabilities and in terms of how the Cooking for Life initiatives were carried out in this in the past years. Okay, can you please just go on the slide? I'm sorry, it's so this within the Pacific we have 8 divisions. The energy program sits with the geoscience, energy and maritime division, or the GEM, and that's where all the energy work related to the policy review database, and even project implementations are being conducted and implemented. And SPC is the principal scientific and technical organization in the Pacific region, and we are glad that we are also being supported by UNSCAP and other partners in terms of working with the energy sector and working with the countries and territory members. Next slide, please. So, Cooking for Life program linkages and synergies. We have national energy policies and roadmaps that talks about improving the livelihoods of women, especially women and children who does most of the cooking in the household level, and also within the current work with UNSCAP and the countries, for instance, Fiji, Tonga, and Kiribati. They've developed also the SDG 7 roadmaps that have also looked into the Cooking for Life initiatives. In our project now in FSM, we are also working with SCAP in developing the SDG 7 roadmap, and I believe this is also part of the work that we look at, mainly with improving the access to electricity, maybe through cooking as well. And also we have a regional framework for energy security and resilience in the Pacific. This also incorporates the need for improving the access to fuel for cooking, efficiency in the cook stoves, and improved biomass cook stoves. And the last framework that we are also have linkages and synergies to low carbon development is the framework for resilience development in the Pacific. So I believe the work on the Cooking for Life initiatives have been integrated into some of these roadmaps and policies that the countries have developed so far. For FSM, as mentioned, there is also another project through World Bank where they're looking at uh, a study on the baseline information on cooking here in the 4 states, and with our project FSMSC we are working together as well with them, try to support the initiative as mentioned also in the SDG 7 roadmap, and with the actual implementation of maybe introducing improved biomass stoves. Next slide. So the Cooking for Life program has the main objectives of, improving or minimizing the impact of energy production, distribution, and consumption on the environment and the economy. Also improving the health and cooking environment for women and children, and also improve uh, the burden of firewood collection of children. In small island countries such as Kiribati, the open fire cooking is prevalent in most households because they cook with biomass, and it's different for each country because in some atoll countries where firewood is limited, firewood can be in the form of small twigs, small shells, even leaves can be used compared to bigger countries where they have to cut down trees, and biomass firewood is also expensive. In places like Kiribati, biomass use is so uh, cooking is a tedious task for women and children. But these are some of the outputs and the outcomes that we have tried to promote when introducing the Cooking for Life program. Basically, the program looks at promoting improved biomass cook stoves and promoting to replace open fire cooking, and to introduce LPG gas cooking to replace kerosene. As in these countries, the two main uses of fuel biomass and kerosene use. And of course, kerosene is being subsidized in most of the countries that we've done studies on. Kerosene can be subsidized in an amount of like 1 million Australian dollars in the case of Kiribati, because this is a cheap fuel that government tries to subsidize to the communities for they use it more often for cooking and also for lighting. So these are still challenges of trying to also look at the cost benefits of having LPG gas use against kerosene use. But of course, we know the health impact of Cooking for Life, cooking with biofuel, biomass in an open fire. So we are trying to introduce the improved cook stove, biomass cook stoves. Thank you. Next slide. Of the activities that have been done by SPC, mainly for Kiribati and Tuvalu, there was this initial project that was done for introducing the improved cook stoves and LPG, as mentioned earlier. And then in RMI, there was initial funding support was provided to a women NGO that started off with introducing these biomass cook stoves, and then later on it became a big project for them. They got funding support from CHEF, UNDP, even the local utilities, MEC, and also with the Energy Office. And they are still distributing these improved biomass cook stove as a replacement also for open fire cooking. So for RMI, they are distributing it to every household. The total household in RMI was 7,800 plus in 2010, and rural population is around 200,000. So I do not have the current status of the stoves that they have distributed, but there's a picture there that's just last month. So I believe they are still distributing this improved biomass cook stove. The same case for Fiji. They've done a lot of work through business communities and also with the government, and they are also distributing. They've distributed around 60,000 improved biomass cook stoves to rural households. So basically, some countries are well ahead. I think the target there is just to give each household a cook stove. But there's some challenges in terms of how the biomass fit in with the ways they cook, or the ways on how they cook food. But it's a matter of like promoting in a way that will change the mindset of women to be able to use this transit from biomass open fire cooking to more of these efficient biomass cook stoves.
Excuse me, Ms. Chuati, can you just wrap up? Since we don't
Okay,
have
I'll
over
just wrap
time
up now
already.
because,
Thank you.
yeah, as we see here, we have different, can you go to the graph? We see a lot of countries that we still have access to, we need access to electricity in most of the countries, mainly in FSM, the Melanesian countries as well as in Kiribati. So for us, cooking is more access to electricity. We are still trying to electrify some of the rural communities, and cooking, we would still want to see that there's improved cook stove, and also maybe at a later stage thinking about how we can use like electrification for cooking, like solar rice cookers and all these other improved cooking fuel such as electricity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chuati, for this presentation focused on clean cooking. And I will move to our next speaker, our last speaker for this session, Mr. Tim Reber, who is the project lead for international program at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, USA. He leads a diverse portfolio aimed to accelerating deployment of renewable energy and increasing access to reliable, clean, and affordable electricity with the partners around the world. So Mr. Tim Reber will outline some learnings from the US NREL work with the recommendations for tools, resources, and the good practices for energy access program. So Mr. Reber, the floor is yours.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So a little bit of background first on the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, for those who might not be familiar. We're one of the 17 US national labs under the US Department of Energy. Most of what the laboratory focuses on is hard research and technology development on renewable energy and other energy efficiency technologies. However, there's a small wing of the laboratory that supports technology deployment and applications of emerging technologies in both domestic and international settings. As part of this, we've been fortunate to be working in Indonesia for quite some time, specifically with some of our colleagues over at ESDM and PLN right now, to support energy transition planning, specifically for piloting an energy transition process in several small remote islands. I'm going to take you through this process and some of the best practices we've learned elsewhere and how we're applying that in Indonesia with our ESDM and PLN colleagues as a way to highlight just a few key examples of some good practices that at least we've learned through our experiences over the years. We're starting this process looking at the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Transition Playbook, which was developed for large-scale energy transitions, and then within that, specifically an island energy transition playbook. And this lays out an entire process for everything starting from stakeholder engagement to the importance of assessing and planning a system to addressing the enabling environment and then operating, maintaining, learning from, and improving your system. So kind of this entire roadmap process that's laid out in this playbook. Now, two key pieces of this that I'd like to highlight that we're starting with. One is the importance of planning, comprehensive data-based planning for your system. And the second is looking at the enabling environment and how can we ensure that the enabling environment is there. So starting with the importance of planning, there's a lot of tools that are available out there. I think we've got several colleagues on the line, other donors and folks working in the space who all I think are aware of all the different analytical tools, modeling tools that can be applied to this space. A couple of tools that NREL uses, ranging from smaller individual community-focused tools, such as our REOPT tool or RE optimization tool, which focuses on how to optimize a renewable energy hybrid mini-grid system for just a single community, all the way up to supporting larger islands, perhaps with multiple interconnected communities, with tools such as Engage, another tool that NREL's developed, and I know some of our colleagues at ESDM and PLN are already familiar with through some work we've been doing in Kalimantan. Regardless of which tools you're using, whether it's an NREL tool or other tools that others are using, what's important is that this is a data-based planning process, and it looks at minimizing the life cycle cost of your system over the life of the system. We can't just look at capital costs. We have to look at the capital costs as well as long-term operational costs well out into the future, sometimes out into 10, 20 years into the future, to make sure we're producing a system and planning a system that is the least cost available. We're not focusing necessarily on renewable energy or emissions mitigation, but what is the least cost? And what we find is that in many cases, by minimizing those costs, we end up getting renewable energy systems. I know our colleague Pak Zainal had mentioned earlier that those RE hybrid systems frequently are the ones that are most viable when we're looking at sort of that least cost planning. The other important piece of the planning process is that we're really looking to embed capacity for planning, embedding that institutional capacity and providing training to local stakeholders and agencies to make sure that they're able to do this planning for themselves independently. Can't always be relying on outside donors, on consultants to do this. We know that local objectives change, local goals change, political winds change, and so making sure that folks can update their plans as needed as goals and objectives change is critical. And so it's really important that we build that capacity within those local agencies. And then finally, the importance of making high quality data available. It all comes down to the quality of data that you have that feeds into this planning process. On the flip side of planning, it's really important to look at the enabling environment. And that's a second part of this transition process. And this comes down to addressing what we call the energy access viability gap. I think a lot of our colleagues on the line have already mentioned, of course, the very high cost of serving some of these remote island communities, given the long distances, given the high cost of financing because of perceived and real risks from investors. And we couple that with the lower revenues that are often available for these small island communities because of inconsistent cash flows, typically lower demands, and it creates this big offset. And so we need to think about ways to decrease costs, to increase revenue, and when you can't do either of those, perhaps even subsidize and provide grant financing in between. And one way we found to do this is to address these issues through a very consistent, transparent, and flexible regulatory framework, which of course regulation is one of the ways that we can implement policy. Many areas in which we've worked, there has not been a clear regulatory framework, and so providing that guidance can really help open up the market and provide comprehensive consistency and confidence to actors in the sector. A few key pieces of what might be included in such a regulatory framework include addressing service and technical standards. I think as many of us know, energy access is not just a binary yes or no, you're connected or you're not. There are degrees, and in many instances, perhaps providing high quality grid parity power maybe isn't necessary for some of these smaller communities. Perhaps going with an approach that perhaps provides slightly lower service standards at lower costs as a starting point can help us make incremental change and eventually bring those standards up to what would be expected. Of course, these service standards are also tied to the importance of performance monitoring and verification. And this isn't something that we suggest simply to create a burden. I think folks hear performance monitoring and then they think this is just going to be another line of red tape. But there really are two key value additions that performance monitoring can provide. One is it improves confidence of all the stakeholders, from consumers to operators to investors and regulators, that what has been promised is actually being delivered. And more importantly, when there is a breakdown, it provides a way and a means to track and diagnose where has that breakdown been so that we can kind of fix the system. And the second important piece of performance monitoring is it creates an avenue for learning and lesson sharing. Tying back to the importance of data, it creates a way for us to have One thing I'll mention is really the importance of tariffs. We've seen a lot of experience with tariffs in terms of very low nationally benchmarked tariffs, creating a barrier because investors need to be able to recoup their expenses. At the end of the day, a remote island grid, a mini grid, is still just basically a small utility, and in order to be financially stable, they need to be able to recoup and recover their costs. There's a lot of different ways to do this. We don't suggest a one-size-fits-all solution. But it is important that in any regulatory framework tariffs are addressed and that there's a way for those mini grid operators and system operators to recover their costs. So I know I'm already over time, could go on for ages, but I'll stop there and keen to get into the Q&A and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reber. Thank you. This is, all these good recommendations based on your, I think, project and activities at the ground. I think that's very valuable for us to move forward. I'd like to, wrap up here just for this session since we don't have time we already go beyond our original plan. So much more behind our schedule. So I will not just give the time for Q&A, but I just want to thank you all for our speakers for this session, for your valuable kind of point, and also share good practices, your good advice, good suggestions. That will be definitely part of the input to move ahead to submit the policy recommendations for the ministers to consider for our next step. I thank you so much, and I suggest we have a round of applause for all the good speakers. Thank you very much for your time, for you share with us your good practices. Thank you. So now back to you, MC, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hong Peng Liu. Let us all give a round of applause for the moderator and also all the speakers. What a great presentations, giving us insights about the importance of collaboration to assure the energy sectors in this world, especially in the archipelagic states. And of course, we hope that this discussion and also all of the exploration could turn into concrete actions. Dear participants, I would like also to kindly ask all of your cooperation to please complete a short survey about this event through the link that will be shared on the chat box. Distinguished speakers and participants, now we will move on to the conclusion of today's event. I would like to once again invite Mr. Hong Peng Liu as the Director of Energy Division of UN ESCAPE to give a conclusion about the webinar today, and also as well as what are the plans moving on forward. The floor is yours, Mr. Hong Peng Liu.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you for giving me the floor again. I won't take too much time. I think since our distinguished speaker already gave a lot of good idea, and also I want to thank all the speakers and also thank the moderator, Ibu Sandra, for moderating the first session. So I hope this webinar and this virtual event provided all the participants with some interesting and valuable insight into the challenges and opportunities remaining for us to achieve universal access to modern energies over the coming years. So from my side, I found that this is particularly helpful to hear some of the success stories and also learn from your actual project that becomes available in the space, to achieve this energy transition and to support energy access in the island states. So we hear a lot of good comments and suggestions, for example, how to improve the current technologies and to support energy access, to increase the investment from the private sector, from multi-development banks, and also to strengthen the collaboration among the different stakeholders. I really think that this is all the core to work together and under the G20, and also even go to beyond the G20 to support the energy access for island states. I think the most important aspects of this is to recognize that despite the current trajectory for energy access, for even all the SDGs, if you look at SDGs, our review, our assessment is not on track, to achieve the 2030 target. But the challenges are really, unbelievable. But if we work together, we collaborate together, so there's a space, there's a potential, we will achieve our goal by 2030. So not only this, the health, social, and the financial benefits part, it's also at the cost of delivery. So how do we just overcome these kind of challenges and address? So the G20's focus this year on energy access in archipelagic states recognize these key challenges, especially for those key vulnerabilities and other factors for island states, and also provide an opportunity to accelerate the progress for island countries and helping to ensure that we leave no island behind. So to this end, as I mentioned earlier, from SCAP side, we are supporting the G20 presidency to work towards a draft set of recommendations to be presented to the energy transition working groups and also to the energy transition ministers meeting late this year. So we hope to get your input, to your recommendations, to your suggestions. So this is where we can use your help, and also we will share with you the link to a questionnaire in the chat box. And that questionnaire provides the opportunity to collect all the data and the information on the key issues and the good practices in the delivery of energy access. As Mr. Temper said, Rapper said, the reliable data is very important. That is really what we need. We need to collect this information to develop the reliable policy recommendations based on this data analysis. So we ask all your support to contribute to this survey and to the questionnaire, which will then inform us the working toward and towards the actions for the G20 and also for others. I thank you very much for all your participation, and thank you in advance for your contribution to this questionnaire. I'll stop here. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Mr. Hong Peng Liu. I really do agree with your statement. It may be challenging, but together we could achieve the goal in 2030. Yes, Mr. Hong Peng Liu.
Okay.
Thank you for your conclusion. I really do agree with your statement that it may be challenging, but together we could achieve the goal in 2030. Thank you once again, Mr. Hong Peng Liu. We're finally at the end of today's event, and let's listen to the closing remarks that will be delivered by Dr. Prahoro Nur Cahyo as the co-chair of the Energy Transition Working Group of G20 Indonesia 2022. The floor is yours.
All distinguished speakers and participants, greeting to you all. Good afternoon from Jakarta. As co-chair of EDWG, I'm pleased to conclude this powerful webinar. In today's webinar, we have been diving into two main sessions. Unlocking No Island Left Behind. We have listened to the experiences and perspective from the champions and agents of islands and archipelagos from various types of stakeholders. We have collected the robust takeaways for No Island Left Behind in assuring energy access and transitions in islands and archipelagic countries. Regarding the two main sessions in the promising development for access and transitions in island context, and also the collaborations beyond energy, here are several essentials I have taken note. First, in terms of technology, several islands and archipelagos can go with hybrid schemes with variable renewable energy, while other islands will be able to go ahead with the whole renewable energy sources. Reliable infrastructures are required to support the systems, such as mini or microgrid and energy storage, and have potential to support energy production such as hydrogen. Second, in this significance, the roles of private sectors are indeed pivotal to unlock the potentials of renewable energy access and transitions in the islands. The set of schemes for developing and funding the campaigns, including engaging the private to the public contributions and mobilizing innovative financing schemes. These are something that we are looking forward. Third, as energy access and transitions go beyond energy sector, energy is the key to unlock the achievement on sustainable energy agenda as well as other agenda 2030 sustainable development goal. Sustainable access to clean electricity and clean cooking to island context can fully potentially enable the way towards other goals on sustainable community, decent jobs, economic growth and opportunities, and also gender empowerment. Therefore, fourth, multi-level cooperations from global, multilateral, regional, national, and subnationals are needed to catalyze access and transitions for islands and archipelagic areas. This will progress towards sustainable energy for islands and archipelagos. This will be also tapping the collaborative works from the pentahelix of policymakers, businesses and industries, civil society organizations, academia, and mass media. All the helixes play roles in expanding the awareness that energy access and transitions in island states is integral part of climate actions and bring benefit to broader scopes of livelihood. Fifth, the last but highly important, we must increase social acceptance and include social ownership of enhancing energy access and transitions for wider benefits of communities in the island ecosystem. With this all, we believe that heading towards and beyond 2030, we could assure no one left behind and no island left behind throughout the whole world's oceanic regions from Caribbean to Pacific, from Indian to Atlantic. Moving forward, we are planning to amplify the recommendations, practices, and experiences in the thematic archipelagic and island energy issues in covering the key deliverables of G20 EDWG in the G20 ministerial levels and G20 leaders level. Looking forward to seeing you again in the next webinar series of G20 Indonesia's Energy Transitions Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nur Cahyo. Your remarks also ends officially this G20 side event, G20 webinar series with the topic of assuring energy access and transition in archipelagic states. We all hope that today's fruitful discussion and also the recommendations paves the way forward for the G20 Energy Transitions Working Group to together, of course, to achieve the goal of a global deal to accelerate energy transitions. I would like to say thank you for all of your participations and your presence. We truly hope to see you once again on the G20 event on June 10. Recover together, recover stronger. Goodbye and see you.
Thank you.